Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to This Month in Pseudoscience, this time for February of 2022. And I gotta tell you, there's been a lot of quackery and pseudoscience and shenanigans that have been going on for the past 30 days. For those of us up here in the northern hemisphere, winter is continuing to plod along and thus causing most of us to stay inside, and also glued to our phones and our computers, and getting imbued with constant amounts of misinformation, including from mainstream websites you wouldn't expect. Like this handy little bottle that claims as a supplement it can make your HPV vanish. And just as a pro tip, I pointed this out before, but it bears repeating. Anytime something says proprietary blend on the label, it means that they don't actually have to report what is in the product, and it can legally be anything they want, as long as it doesn't do you any harm. And that charming bottle of pills you can buy on Amazon. That's right. Also, the same place you can find this book, The Cure for HIV and AIDS. Isn't that charming? Now, all of these are scams, of course, but the reason why we have such a problem with misinformation, which is information that is not correct, or disinformation, information which is intentionally not correct and spread as if it were, is very simple. People, greed, and a lack of human empathy. Take, for instance, this faith healer in Pakistan that convinced a pregnant woman to have a nail driven into her head in order to ensure that the baby would be a boy. And just for a second, consider what kind of inhuman monster would not only convince a very vulnerable and pregnant mother to do something like that, but to do it himself. The faith healer himself tap that nail into her skull. Ugh. And if it seems like I'm claiming most Western quacks and pseudoscientists can be just as vile, yes, I am. Absolutely. You can do even further and more grotesque damage by simple messaging and propaganda than you can with a literal nail and hammer. But hey, let's take a break from the health grifters and let's check in on religion here in the United States.
Of it, the most you can get, just start throwing it in there. 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 Burn it. Burn it. Burn it.
Oh. Holy shit. Now, this was a book-burning event hosted by one Pastor Greg Locke. This guy is so vile and so crazy. I could do a whole video just on him, but just to kind of recap a little bit, here's some of his greatest hits.
I know right-wing watching. I don't care. If they go through round 2 and you start showing up all these masks and all this nonsense, I'll ask you to leave. I will ask you to leave. I am not playing these Democrat games up in this church. If you want a social distance, go to First Baptist Church, but don't come to this one. I'm done with it.
And it always begins with a sexual revolution, which I promise you, every time in history has always led, number 2, to a homosexual revolution. And I promise you, here's what's going to happen next. This crowd is going to come out of the woodworks, and they're going to be marrying their dogs. They're going to be marrying their cats. Ellen's already talking about some woman that married herself. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, right?
Yeah, he's a psycho, like legitimately deranged. Now, he hosted this book burning event at the beginning of February, and the purpose was to destroy books like Witchcraft, Harry Potter, Twilight. Maybe the Twilight one's not that bad. Kidding. Actually, those are some of my favorite bad movies to watch. They are so incredibly fun and bad and awful. Just, it's perfect. Fun fact, they're even better if you're projecting it onto a wobbly curtain. Anyhoozle, the event was going swimmingly until this happened.
Keeping my copy of Darwin's Origin of Species at Fahrenheit 451. Woohoo! Praise Satan! Woohoo! Hail Satan! Hail to his strength and power! Woo! Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
absolute legends. That was Chris Hardin and his husband. They were a gay couple, just giving them a piece of their mind. I think this is actually my favorite part.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan! And I'm immune to your rebuke! Hail Satan!
Straight up gangsta with that reverse Uno card. Destroyed! Aw, he called him Buddy. That's cute. Anyway, nothing about that should really surprise you if you've ever heard of Pastor Greg Locke before. But let's dip into one more fascinating clip of him.
Are you telling me my kid's possessed? No, I'm telling you, your kid could be demonized and attacked, but your doctor calls it autism. I don't care if you stand or not. I don't care if you leave or not. I'm telling you, there's deliverance in the name of Jesus Christ for your children and their children's children. There's deliverance in that.
Well, I have to say, Greggykins has some sick dance moves.
Calling to say I...
This claim that autism is due to demons is obviously disgusting, but then he's a disgusting person. However, thinking about disgusting people and being inappropriate about autism, it's time for Quack Watch.
The New World Order.
Freedom, baby. Freedom.
Well, I came here because I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
This month, I wanted to take a dive into a company that my dear friend Mike told me about. That company is Brain Balance. On the surface, Brain Balance seems like some sort of therapeutic treatment for children with behavioral or attention issues. This is largely in their messaging of hope and supportive, direct care for children. And this is a very effective hook to lure in prospective parents. But the problem is very apparent when you look on their website at who they can help. ADHD, processing disorders, dyslexia, and autism. For the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on autism. Now, Brain Balance is very careful not to say that they can cure autism. They say things like the brain can change and modify in ways that will alleviate symptoms, and that their program does just that. Now, is there any evidence that this is true? Well, let's find out. But before we do, we got to look into who exactly made Brain Balance. Brain Balance is founded by Robert Melillo. Now, he's not a doctor, he's a chiropractor. I'm sure you're very shocked to hear that. Jeff, talking about a possible quack cure and it's founded by a chiropractor? Hold the phone. That's never happened before. Specifically, he calls himself a neurologist, but he's a chiropractic neurologist, which is in no way the same thing or even remotely close to legitimate scientific medical neuroscience, like at all. He's also a professor at the National University of Health Sciences, a chiropractic school where he regurgitates chiropractic to the next generation of people to go out and scam people with popping their backs. And if you feel like I'm being uncharitable to this guy, just wait a second and really absorb what this program is that he created. Brain Balance was founded in 2006, and the first center opened the very next year. Now, as of 2018, there are 110 chains in the business. Now, notice I did say chain. And that would be because Brain Balance is not a cohesive singular entity, it's a franchise. Yeah, but wait, we'll get there. The basic premise behind Brain Balance is that some children either have a weaker left or right hemisphere of the brain, or they both have trouble communicating together. As you may know, we do have two hemispheres in our brain, and they are, in very broad terms, in certain areas mapped to opposite sides of the body. For example, in your primary motor cortex, if you were to be controlling your left arm, it would be the right-hand side of the brain that is doing that. This also is kind of, sort of, I'm having a very, very broadly and loosely describe this. It also has to do with sense data and sight to a certain extent. But for the purposes of what we're talking about today, I think that's probably enough. And just for the record, this is nothing to do with the old-timey claim that if you were like right brain or left brain dominant, it could tell you something about your personality. That's that's just old-timey quackery. Like, this is something totally different. So at the core level, Robert and Brain Balance want you to believe that an autistic child's symptoms are because of a neurological imbalance in their brain. Now, is that true? We'll get to that in a second. But I also want to dive into how they think this happens.
The Brain Balance Center. And today we're hearing from the doctor who founded it, Dr. Robert Melillo. He joins us here in the studio. That would be you.
That's me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we talked briefly before the show, and I was surprised to hear you say that this is not something that's inherent in kids, that it's primarily environmental.
Now, this is very key. Melillo and Brain Balance want you to believe that autism is largely from the environment. Now, this is a bold and powerful claim, especially for parents of autistic children, because it would be very good for their grief or their strife if they're dealing with this potentially very stressful situation to not think that autism is genetic and thus in some way their fault, necessarily. It's not me, it's not my family, it's the world. And I can tell you right now that it's a misplaced bit of grief because you can't control your genes. And unfortunately, we really do understand autism a lot better than we used to, and it is largely genetic. And how do we know? Well, we know all the way back in the 70s with twin studies. An identical twin has an 80% chance to have autism if their sibling has it, compared to 40% for fraternal twins. We also can map prevalence by heritability through generations. But we have also identified over 100 genes that researchers are very confident are related to autism. Now, that isn't to say that environment can't impact it, because it does. But it's not what Brain Balance wants you to think. The environment we're talking about that can exacerbate or potentially cause autism is in the womb. Yeah. So right from the get-go, they are wildly incorrect. But do they have any studies to show that there's an effectiveness to the Brain Balance program? Maybe they just accidentally stumbled upon a fantastic treatment. Well, no, not really. So far they have 2 papers for their proof. The first one was done by Melillo, and it also had no control group, so you could just toss that one. The second one had a control group, but it took that control group and it compared it to the first study. Yeah. Absolute garbage research, let alone the fact that it was published in a journal with an impact factor of 0.12. Just drink in this chart. Okay, but hey, whether it's crap or not, it's good news for Robbie.
We have 2 studies now, so that means that we qualify as what we call evidence-based at this point.
Listen.
Now, the main thesis of Brain Balance is addressed by the treatment. Wait, sorry. They're very careful not to call it a treatment.
This is almost curable. I mean, I know you don't like to use that word.
Right.
And through this treatment, and I know this educational process.
Right. The educational process of exercises and goofy-looking eyewear in order to train up one side of the brain to make stronger connections and thus alleviate symptoms. Now, is there any truth in that? Well, yes and no. Our brains, they don't function in isolated pockets. When we use fMRI machines, pretty much doing anything causes your brain to light up like a Christmas tree all over the place. But the connective tissue between 2 hemispheres is called the corpus callosum, which is a bridge of neurons. And some studies have shown that doing tasks with your non-dominant hand, like for instance trying to practice your handwriting with your left if you're right-handed, can cause it to become denser. But that shouldn't be that surprising either, because we've known for decades that exercising increases dendritic branching. Exercising is great for your brain. Overall, it's great for your brain, and in many cases, it usually helps improve your mood too. So the central question we have to ask ourselves is, if autistic children's brains are imbalanced in some way, can this help? Well, there's this pesky little fact that destroys the question before you even ask it. It turns out that statistically, by a large margin, autistic children's brains are more symmetrical than non-autistic children's brains. So if that's the case, then how then can Brain Balance claim that it can help, it can treat, let's be honest, making these claims that they can do something when they can't even accurately describe the disorder in which they're trying to treat? Now let's back up and let's really evaluate. Brain Balance is founded by a chiropractor. It's based on shoddy and terrible evidence. Their main theory is not even coherent, and even if it was, it couldn't help autistic children because a problem they assume is simply not there. Now, I'd like to share a brief clip from The Doctors in which a couple of reps for Brain Balance were there trying to shill their program.
Because when I read about your programs, my thought process was, why not try it?
Of course.
But then I saw the price tag. And I think that's why we need to discuss this openly and honestly, because there are a lot of things that can be done that are free.
And the central problem is right there. It costs money, a lot of money. How much? Well, the initial testing for your child will be several $100s, but for a 6-month course is usually about $12,000. Now, when I went through and I was looking at these testimonials, it seemed like it was a very common occurrence for whoever these, I want to call them auditors, you know, just to twist the knife a little bit. Very commonly, we're recommending a much longer, sometimes year-long course. So, you know, $24,000. Now, this is a huge payout for a treatment that by their own thesis can't even work. But there's big money in this. Big money. Because check this out. Down at the bottom of their website. That's right. I said they were a franchise. And for the low cost of only $250,000 to $500,000, you too can open up your own Brain Balance Center to scam money out of desperate parents and to put a bunch of autistic children through bizarre exercises and wear goofy goggles, preying upon the vulnerable, exploiting the disabled. Amazing! Look, the simple fact of the matter is this. We don't understand autism enough to know how to treat each child because it manifests wildly differently depending on the person. And so because of that, having these broad treatments that will guarantee results across any number of children with autism is usually going to be a scam. And they're usually just going to take your money and it's not going to help. But there are things that you can do to help your child with autism. Exercise is good. Finding things that they interact with and are interested in and encouraging that is good. Very, very good after-school programs or behavioral support programs inside the school. These things can be invaluable, and these can be good steps towards building up a much more productive, happy, and supportive future for your child. Just be aware that there will always be predators out there wanting to take your money and exploit your trust. And with a little bit of sunlight, we can expose what kind of pseudoscience bullshit they are. Just be careful. And now it's time for the COVID catch-up.
There is no evidence that I can see that a pandemic exists.
Hey, you gotta vaccinate in the Lone Star State. Vaccination is so great. Vaccinate.
I only asked, how many vaccines have you had? Have you been a good little Nazi? Hail Fauci! Hail Fauci!
I'm just gonna play this one for you.
So, what's going on?
They're not vaccine passports. They are data passports. They are participation passports, but there's no medical reason behind these. If I had come to you 2 years ago and said, here's what the government want to do. They want to give everybody a chip. They want to put all your medical data and all your financial data onto that chip. That will be your complete ID and they can control you or shut you out of society from that. Ideally, they'd like to put a quantum tattoo so that they can remotely medicate you. That sounds absolutely insane. That's the road that we are going down right now.
Why, yes, that does sound completely insane. Now, we know there aren't microchips in vaccines, of course, but quantum tattoo, what is that about? Well, as it turns out, there's been some really interesting research and discussion surrounding the idea of making a type of tattoo ink that is invisible, except when you shine with an infrared light, and it can display your medical information. Kind of like a life alert bracelet, but without having to wear any annoying jewelry. And honestly, it's kind of a neat idea, but it's just a tattoo. That's all it is. You can't remotely medicate somebody with it. That's like, man, woo!
That sounds absolutely insane.
But on to more legitimately concerning news. The Guardian recently came out with an article talking about who is making money in anti-vaccine messaging. Now, we've known for a long time that anti-vax and chiropractor superstars make lots of money by selling online courses, premium content, doing appearances at conventions, etc., etc. But they now have a new revenue stream which is seemingly very popular, and that is Substack. Researchers found that across the website, anti-vaxxers were raking in somewhere between 2.5 million and 12.5 million from their subscribers. And Substack is basically a publishing platform for newsletters. Think of it kind of like a mailing list where you would pay for specific information, or in this case, specific disinformation. But I digress. Noted personalities in the anti-vax world like Joseph Mercola, Alex Berenson, Stephen Kirsch, and Robert Malone are among those who have found new means of making bank from publishing their hardline anti-vax propaganda. Newsletters cited by CCDH Research include a piece authored by Mercola headlined, "More children have died from COVID shot than from COVID," a Berenson Substack questioning whether mRNA vaccines have contributed to, rather than stopped, the spread of COVID. A Kirsch newsletter stating that vaccines kill far more people than they might have saved from COVID, and a newsletter from Malone warning that mRNA vaccines could lead to permanent damage of children's organs. Now, when questioned about this, Substack replied, "As we face growing pressure to censor content published on Substack that to some seems dubious or objectionable, our answer remains the same. We make decisions based on principles, not PR. We will defend free expression, and we will stick to our hands-off approach to content moderation." Now, on the surface, that seems laudable, especially if you're into the freedom of speech kind of realm. But you have to understand, Substack is still a company. That decision is not based upon any type of moral standing. They stand to gain more monetarily from those people being willing to pay for that premium content. Now, the alternative to that would be to, embrace human empathy and maybe help try and stem the tide of a misinformation, disinformation campaign that is exacerbating a global pandemic. You could do that, but it doesn't pay as well, now does it? But it's not just celebs and companies that are raking in the dough lately. 2 nurses on Long Island are accused of forging COVID-19 vaccination cards and pocketing more than $1.5 million from the scheme. Now, the 2, maybe 3 nurses were caught running a scheme where they would give out fake vaccination cards for $220 for adults and $85 for children. But it's not just a matter of the paper and ink vaccination cards. You see, they also had access to input this into the state's vaccination database. Yeah. Now, when the police searched one of their homes, they found $900,000 in cash and a ledger of bookkeeping records detailing out $1.5 million in profit. Now, if each one of those accounts that were forged were adults, then the people exploiting this and walking around with fake vaccination would be around 6,800, but because I'm sure a lot of them were children as well, it could be many more. But lastly, we need to talk about Canada. You knew this was coming, and specifically we need to talk about the truck convoy in Ottawa that is protesting vaccine mandates. Now, despite my disagreements with the messaging of this protest, and I just simply don't agree with it, I need to say that I support overall, and including their, right to protest. So I might disagree with them, but it is their right to protest. But there are very important things that we need to talk about surrounding this protest. And yes, I will be skipping some of the more troubling aspects that have happened in this situation. If you want to see me go hog wild on politics, go watch my second channel. That's not what this one's for. First, we have to understand that Canada has a much more restrictive program for battling COVID than the United States does. All of their provinces have, at one point or another, utilized all 3 of the major mandates to try and stem the tide. This includes vaccine passports, school mask mandates, and the banning of large indoor gatherings. Now, even the most conservative area of Canada, like Alberta, has imposed all 3. And this is with Jason Kenney, who is the province's conservative premier, arguing in September that a passport system was the only way to cut viral transmission without destroying businesses. Thus, they wanted to ensure that they could have life continuing, business continuing as usual, and were willing to embrace the more restrictive measures. This is the hardcore conservative part of Canada, and they are in favor of that. But poll after poll after poll shows that Canadians overwhelmingly support most of these restrictive measures. And it's not to say that they like these restrictions, because nobody likes restrictions, but, we're in a pandemic. In fact, recent polls have shown that the majority of Canadians are actually in favor of vaccine mandates. Now, let's be clear. That means that you have to have a COVID vaccine in order to participate in society. Like at all. And they are in favor of that. That is more restrictive than anything that has been done so far in Canada, and we've not gotten anywhere near that in the United States. So why then is there a convoy? Why was there a major shutdown on a bridge restricting the inflow of goods into Canada from the US that was costing over $300 million in damage a day? Why? And if we look at the polling data, most Canadians do not support the protest. So what is it? Is this a trucker thing specifically? Well, given that the Transport Minister of Canada has said that 90% of truckers are vaccinated, probably not. In fact, the Canadian Trucking Alliance has said that it does not support protests on public roadways, highways, and bridges. So, again, probably not a trucker thing. So it's not in line with the popular attitude of Canada. It's not a trucker thing either. And because of some of the strange extremist elements that have been seen, what can we assume is the point? Well, in my opinion, it's just another unholy alliance between anti-vaxxers and the freedom movement. They're a perfect fit for each other. Each one needs to desperately be on the fringe and being persecuted in some way, to the point that they will actually manufacture these things. We should all be allowed to protest, but the value of freedom of speech is the ability to speak truth to power. Now, when somebody uses freedom of speech and the purpose of protest to then spread lies and propaganda, then the value of freedom of speech actually goes down, and we all lose. This is why I always say you need to be careful. You need to be skeptical. When things like this start happening, you need to stop. Take a step back, look at the broader picture, and know how to protect yourself from getting sucked into something that otherwise might be a really bad idea. You have to be careful, because people will do anything they can to take the virtuous nature of some of the most sacred things in our world, like our ability to protest, like the ability to speak truth to power, and weaponize it. So don't ever be afraid to stop, pause, take a step back, and really examine what's going on, what you're immersed in. And make sure that you're sifting through what you're hearing to find those little nuggets of bullshit and toss them out. You need to be careful. Protect yourself. Anyway, that's going to be it for this month in Pseudoscience. Quite a doozy. Had a lot of fun making it. If you enjoy this type of content, please, by all means, click subscribe, click the bell, check out my Patreon, check out my other channels, come see me on Twitch. We're having a great time lately. And as always, I will see you at the end of the month, the last Sunday of the month, for the Wingnut Roundup. Take care of yourselves. From my family to yours, bye-bye.